Bring in Texas Congressman Michael McCaul, the top Republican on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Good to have you with us today, Congressman. You know, I'm fascinated by that video of Vladimir Putin just moments ago. He's basically saying that the leadership in Ukraine is full of drug addicts and neo-Nazis, and he's asking the Ukrainian military, which has really, as Jennifer was saying, been quite resilient, at least in these first 48 hours, to turn and to support him.
You know, this is part of his disinformation campaign to persuade his own people that what he's doing is righteous. He has protesters now in his own country. I would argue that Putin himself is behaving like a Nazi. He is just like Hitler was when he invaded Poland. And the idea that he's going to call the Ukrainians Nazis is really just, it's really demented, I think, is the word. The resistance movement, I must say, has been very inspiring. Now, it's very important to note that only a third to a half of the Russian troops on the border have fully been deployed in Ukraine. And I think that's probably the next shoe you're going to see drop in Ukraine. Also, the ports in the Black Sea, very important. Mariupol and then Odessa, I worry about that as well. He wants to control the Black Sea. Martha, a lot of this is about controlling energy. Absolutely.
What about the Zelensky-Biden phone call that took place a short time ago? They've had a lot of conversations. I'm just wondering what you have heard about what was agreed to, or whether we're going to provide any additional support. We know the NATO response force is engaging, and that's a big deal. That's a very big deal. But that doesn't extend into Ukraine, does it?
Correct. And you know, prior to the invasion, we called for sanctions, particularly Nord Stream 2, to provide a deterrence. Zelensky wanted that as well. The Biden administration would not agree to that. You know, now we're post-invasion. There's no more time for talk. It's time for action. That would be severe and swift sanctions. And I would argue that what the administration has done now is not the case. We ought to be sanctioning Putin himself, by the way. That would send a very strong, message. And then also the lethal aid to these resistance fighters. This administration held up a $200 million package that Congress passed, and now is finally deploying it. This should have been done prior to the invasion, and now they're saying if we do, if Congress appropriates more, which I think we will, that, gee, it's too dangerous. We may not be able to help out these resistance fighters because of conditions on the ground. I'm getting personal calls from Lithuania and other countries that want to provide the Stinger weapons, the javelins, the ammunition, the rifles. And now is the time. No more time for hesitation.
Just as a practical matter, how do you get that kind of equipment in now that Russia has already invaded? And doesn't that put us in a position where we could be perceived as joining the war, even just getting all of that equipment there?
Well, and that's why we argued putting it in before the invasion. Now we're post-invasion. You have to do that now through third parties. And it's important to note as our troop deployments are going to NATO countries, that's to defend NATO. It is not to defend Ukraine, although we'd like to do that. We're not going to put troops in Ukraine. They're not a NATO ally. Article 5 does not apply in NATO, but we need to provide the lethal assistance so the resistance can fight the Russians.
I want to bring this up. This is Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, talking about he believes that Putin wants to go further than just Ukraine, and if he gets it, he will. Let's listen to this.
The Kremlin's objectives are not limited to Ukraine. Russia has demanded legally binding agreements to announce further NATO enlargement and to remove troops and infrastructure from allies that joined after 1997.
Do you believe that if he is successful in Ukraine, that he will go after most likely the Baltics? And, what kind of time frame would we be looking at then? We see this NATO buildup.
Well, that is the ultimate question. I asked the Secretary, talked to the State Department yesterday, that very question. They think Putin does recognize what Article 5 would mean to him. However, he has talked about going back to the 1997 NATO alliance, which would exclude the Baltic states and Poland. They are in Moldova near Odessa. That's not a NATO country. I can easily see them expanding into that region to control the Black Sea. The big question is what you just posed, because that's a question to whether or not What is happening right now goes from, this invasion into Ukraine to what could be World War III.
I think that's what everyone is very concerned about here in the United States. I think finding some sort of way to peace is the path, because this thing could really just pick up speed and steamroll in a lot of ways in Europe and potentially here at home too. Ranking Member McCaul, thank you very much, sir. Always good to have you with us.
Thanks, Martha.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.